The grand hall shimmered with golden lights as laughter filled the air. Expensive perfume floated through the room, mixing with the sound of glasses clinking and music playing softly in the background. It was a night of celebration. The richest man in the city had just finished building his new mansion, and tonight he wanted everyone to see it. The house was so large it felt like a palace. From the shining marble floors to the crystal chandeliers that sparkled above, everything screamed of wealth and pride. The man who owned it loved being admired. He loved being the center of attention, and tonight he had everything he needed to show off his success. The guests arrived in sleek cars and glittering dresses. Some carried expensive watches that caught the light with every movement. They laughed loudly, showing off their joy and importance. In the middle of the noise and glamour, a man in a plain uniform quietly pushed a mop across the floor. His back was slightly bent, his shoes worn out, and his hands rough from work. He was the janitor. No one paid him attention, and he didn't expect them to. He moved carefully, cleaning up spilled drinks and footprints, trying not to be noticed. He had worked in the mansion for only a few months. Most of the time, no one even remembered his name. People talked around him as if he wasn't there. But he didn't mind. He did his job quietly and with care. Every time he passed by the grand piano sitting in the corner of the hall, he couldn't help but glance at it. It was a beautiful instrument shining under the lights. Sometimes when no one was around, he liked to run his fingers lightly over the keys. Not enough to make a sound, just enough to feel the smoothness of the ivory. As the evening went on, the host made his way through the crowd, his voice loud and confident. He told stories about his business deals and how he built his empire from nothing. People listened, nodded, and laughed at every joke. He enjoyed every bit of their attention. Near the piano, a small stage was set up. A famous pianist was supposed to arrive and perform for the guests. Everyone was looking forward to it. The music would be the highlight of the night. But as time passed, the host received a call that the pianist couldn't come. An emergency, they said. The man's face turned red with anger. He had promised his guests a performance, and now he had nothing. He looked around the room, irritated, and then his eyes landed on the janitor who was wiping the floor nearby. A smirk appeared on his face. He thought of something that might turn his frustration into entertainment. "Well," he said loudly, calling for attention, "it looks like our musician won't make it tonight." The crowd turned to listen. "But maybe we can find a replacement." He looked directly at the janitor. "What about him? He's been looking at that piano all night." People followed his gaze and began to laugh. The janitor froze, his heart beating fast. He wasn't sure if he should answer or pretend he didn't hear. The host grinned wider. "Come on, my friend. You know how to clean floors, but can you play keys?" The guests laughed harder. Someone added, "Maybe he'll surprise us." The laughter grew louder. The janitor felt heat rising in his face. He wanted to walk away, but something inside him stopped him. The host's fiancée, a woman dressed in silver, smiled with mischief. "Play this," she said teasingly, naming a popular classical tune. "If you play it well, I'll marry you myself." The crowd roared with laughter. Everyone thought it was a joke, a moment of fun to fill the evening. The janitor looked at the piano again. He remembered the feeling of the keys under his fingers. For years he hadn't played properly. Life had pushed him far from the world of music. Still, something about the moment stirred an old part of him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was pain. Maybe it was simply time to stop hiding what he loved. Slowly, he put the mop aside, straightened his back, and walked toward the piano. The laughter softened a little as people realized he was actually taking the challenge. Phones came out of pockets. Guests wanted to record the moment when the janitor embarrassed himself. The host folded his arms, smiling in amusement. The fiancée whispered something to her friend, both giggling. The janitor reached the piano and gently sat down on the bench. His fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment he just sat there quiet, as if the room around him had disappeared. He took a deep breath. The crowd waited. Someone coughed. Another person muttered, "Let's see this show." Then his hands began to move. At first it was soft, a simple melody that floated gently through the air. The notes were smooth, clear, and full of something no one expected. Within seconds, the noise in the room faded. The laughter stopped. His hands moved with ease, dancing across the piano. The melody grew richer, more emotional. Each note seemed to carry a story. The crowd stood still, caught off guard. The host's smile faded as he listened. His fiancée's eyes widened. The music filled every corner of the grand hall, reaching the hearts of everyone present. He played with a grace that no one had seen before. It wasn't just skill, it was feeling raw and real. Every sound seemed to speak, telling of love, loss, and long years of silence. People began to forget who was playing. All they could do was listen. The janitor's face stayed calm, his eyes half closed. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for himself, for the boy who once dreamed of being on stage before life took it all away. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds. It was the kind of silence that no one wanted to break. Then one person clapped, then another. Within moments, the whole hall erupted into applause. People stood, cheering and shouting. The janitor didn't move for a while. He sat there, his hands resting gently on the keys, his heart still racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The host looked around, trying to act as if he wasn't embarrassed. He clapped too, forcing a smile, but his eyes were uneasy. The guests surrounded the janitor, asking where he had learned to play like that. He only smiled humbly and said, "It's something I used to love." His voice was quiet but sincere. A few people shook his hand. Others looked ashamed for laughing earlier. The host's fiancée approached him slowly. Her voice was softer now. "That was beautiful," she said. The janitor nodded politely and stood up, ready to leave the spotlight. He didn't want praise or attention. He had simply played because something inside him told him to. He picked up his mop again and started walking back toward the corner of the hall. The crowd continued talking about him, replaying the moment in their minds. No one had expected to witness something like that at a party meant to show off wealth. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, the host sat alone, thinking. He couldn't forget the way the janitor had played. The music still echoed in his head. It had been so honest, so pure, that it made everything else in the room, the gold, the wine, the luxury, feel small. He didn't know whether to feel angry, embarrassed, or inspired. For the first time in years, he felt something real, and all because of a man he had mocked. The janitor finished cleaning quietly and packed up his things. Before leaving, he walked past the piano once more. He let his fingers touch the keys gently. A small smile crossed his face. He didn't know that by morning his life would change. Someone had recorded the entire moment on their phone. By sunrise, that video would spread everywhere. But for now, he just wanted to go home, rest and carry with him the sound of music that had been silent for too long. That night, two worlds had met, one of money and one of dreams. And for the first time, it wasn't the rich man who owned the night. It was the janitor who reminded everyone what true beauty really looked like. The next morning, the city woke up to something unexpected. On social media, a video had gone viral overnight. It showed a man in a janitor's uniform sitting at a grand piano in a room full of rich guests. The first part of the video showed people laughing at him, but what came next silenced everyone. The man's hands moved across the piano like magic. His playing was filled with emotion, and even through a phone screen, people could feel it. The comments flooded in from all over the world. "This man plays with his soul," one person wrote. "He should be on stage, not cleaning floors," said another. Within hours, millions of people had watched it. At the mansion, the host was furious. He had wanted to be the star of the night, but now the janitor was the one everyone talked about. His phone kept ringing with reporters asking about the mysterious pianist who worked for him. He tried to act like it didn't bother him, but deep down it did. His pride hurt more than anything. His fiancée, however, couldn't stop thinking about the music. She had laughed at first like everyone else, but when the janitor played, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The sound had reached her heart in a way that no luxury or jewelry ever had. The janitor, on the other hand, had no idea what was happening online. He woke up early as usual, ready for another day of work. He walked through the quiet streets, thinking only about his next shift. When he reached the mansion, the guards looked at him differently. One of them smiled awkwardly and said, "You're famous now." The janitor didn't understand at first. Then someone showed him the video on a phone. His eyes widened in surprise. "That's me?" he asked quietly. The guard laughed. "Yes, that's you. You're everywhere." Inside the house, some of the staff greeted him with respect for the first time. People who used to ignore him now wanted to talk to him. The cook told him that her daughter had shared. The janitor smiled shyly, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to attention. He had spent most of his life being invisible, and now suddenly everyone could see him. Later that morning, the host called him to the main hall. The janitor walked in slowly, wondering if he was in trouble. The host sat at the large dining table, a cup of coffee in hand, pretending to be calm. "You've caused quite a scene," he said with a forced smile. "Everyone's talking about you." The janitor lowered his head. "I didn't mean to, sir," he said softly. "I was only playing because you asked." The host looked at him for a moment, then said, "Well, your little performance made me look foolish. You turned my party into a stage for yourself." His voice carried a hint of anger. The janitor shook his head. "I didn't want that. I only played because everyone was waiting for music." The fiancé entered the room just then. She looked at the janitor and said gently, "He didn't do anything wrong. You were the one who told him to play." The host frowned but didn't argue. She turned to the janitor and smiled. "Your music was beautiful. I couldn't stop thinking about it." He nodded politely and said, "Thank you." Then he quietly stepped back and asked if he could return to work. The host waved his hand, dismissing him. But even as the janitor left the room, the fiancé's eyes followed him. Something about his calmness and humility stayed with her. By noon, reporters had started waiting outside the mansion gates. They wanted to know who the janitor was, what his story was, and how he learned to play like that. The host didn't like the attention. He told the guards not to let anyone in. The janitor tried to avoid them, but eventually, one reporter caught him near the staff entrance. She spoke kindly, asking if he would like to share his story. He hesitated. "I'm just a worker," he said quietly. "There's nothing special to tell." But she insisted, and finally he agreed to a short interview. He told her that music had always been his dream, but life had taken him down a different path. He didn't give many details. He just said, "I never stopped loving the piano." When the interview was published, it touched people even more. The story of a janitor who played like a master spread everywhere. Schools invited him to speak. A small music studio offered him a chance to record a song. At first he was unsure. He had never been in a recording studio. But when he sat down in front of the piano there, everything felt natural again. The same emotions flowed through his hands. The producer was amazed. "You play like someone who has lived 1,000 stories," he said. The janitor smiled softly. "Maybe I have," he replied. Back at the mansion, the host watched the news and felt mixed emotions. Part of him admired the janitor's talent, but another part couldn't stand that the world now saw him as a hero. He didn't like losing control of the story. He called his assistant and said, "We need to manage this. I don't want people thinking I'm the villain here." So he planned a press statement. He stood in front of cameras, smiling as he said, "It was a wonderful night, and I'm proud that someone from my staff could share his gift. I'm happy that my home became the place where his talent was discovered. People believed him, but deep down everyone knew he hadn't been kind that night. Still, it made him look good in front of the media." The janitor continued his work as usual, though his heart felt lighter. He didn't care about fame. He just liked knowing that his music had reached people. Every evening after finishing his shift, he went to a small community center nearby where there was an old upright piano. He practiced there alone, sometimes for hours. The caretaker there liked to listen quietly from the doorway. "You were meant for this," she told him one night. "Don't stop now." He smiled and nodded. One evening, while he was playing, a man from a music school visited him. He introduced himself and said, "We saw your video. We want you to come and teach children who can't afford lessons. They need someone like you." The janitor hesitated. "I'm not a teacher," he said. But the man replied, "You don't need to be. You just need to show them how to love music." After thinking for a moment, he agreed. It was the first time in years he had been offered something more than just a cleaning job. At the mansion, the host's fiancée began volunteering at the same community center. When she saw the janitor teaching the children, she felt something change inside her. The way he spoke to them, the way he encouraged them to believe in themselves, reminded her of the kindness she hadn't seen in a long time. One afternoon, she approached him after class. "You really care about them," she said softly. He smiled. "Music gave me hope when I had nothing else. Maybe it can do the same for them." She watched him for a moment and said, "I used to think success was about having everything, but you make me think it's about giving something back." Over the next few weeks, the janitor's classes grew. More children came and more people donated instruments. His story continued to inspire others. He became a symbol of quiet strength, of how talent can survive even in the hardest times. Still, he stayed humble, always arriving early to set up chairs and tuning the old piano himself. When reporters came to film, he didn't talk much. He let his music speak for him. Meanwhile, the host began noticing that his fiancée was distant. She spent less time at his events and more time helping at the community center. He didn't understand what she saw in that simple life. One evening, he followed her there and saw her watching the janitor play for the children. For the first time, he realized that what he had never been able to buy with all his money was the respect and peace that came from genuine goodness. It was something the janitor had without even trying. As the days went by, the janitor's life started changing slowly but beautifully. He wasn't rich, but he was finally doing what he loved. Every note he played carried years of pain and hope. People who came to listen didn't see a worker anymore. They saw a man who had found his purpose, and though he didn't say it out loud, he knew deep down that music had given him back his life. That night, after everyone had gone home, he sat alone by the piano again. The hall was quiet, just like the night he had played at the mansion. He touched the keys gently and smiled. He remembered the laughter, the challenge, and how it had led him here. Sometimes, he thought, life gives us the most beautiful gifts in the most unexpected ways. He began to play softly, and the notes filled the empty room, echoing like a promise that no dream is ever truly lost. Weeks passed, and life around the janitor began to shift in quiet but powerful ways. The children at the community center looked forward to his lessons every day. Some of them came from hard backgrounds, some from families who could barely afford to eat. But when they sat near the piano, they forgot everything else. They listened to his soft voice as he explained how to let music speak from the heart. He didn't teach them to be perfect. He taught them to feel. Don't just press the keys, he would say with a smile. Tell your story through them. The children loved him for that. To them, he wasn't just a teacher. He was a friend who believed in them when no one else did. Word continued to spread about the janitor's story. More reporters came, but he kept his answers short. He didn't care for fame or interviews. All he wanted was to keep playing and helping others find hope through music. Sometimes, when he finished teaching, he stayed back alone in the room playing soft melodies that no one else heard. Those moments were his escape, his peace. One afternoon, a group of local musicians visited the community center. They had heard about him and wanted to meet the man who played with such emotion. They invited him to perform with them at a charity event in the city. The janitor hesitated at first. I've never played in front of so many people, he said quietly. But the children encouraged him. You can do it, they said, smiling and clapping. He looked at their eager faces and finally nodded. All right, he said softly. I'll do it. When the day of the charity concert arrived, the hall was filled with people from all walks of life. Some came out of curiosity, others because they had been moved by his story. The lights dimmed and the stage glowed softly. The janitor walked to the piano, dressed simply as always. The audience went silent. When he started to play, everything else disappeared. The sound filled the hall with warmth. Each note carried emotion, honesty, and truth. People in the audience closed their eyes, feeling something they couldn't describe. The performance lasted only a few minutes, but when it ended, the applause seemed endless. Cameras flashed, people stood, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. After the show, a man approached him backstage. He was the director of a major music academy. You have a rare gift, he said with admiration. We'd be honored to have you play with our orchestra or even teach here. The janitor was speechless. He had never imagined that such a door could open for him. He thanked the man and said he would think about it. Deep down, he was happy. But he also knew that the children at the community center needed him. That night, he sat by his small apartment window and looked at the city lights. He thought about the long journey that had brought him here, the laughter, the pain, the years of silence. Maybe, he whispered to himself, this is just the beginning. Meanwhile, at the mansion, the host watched his television as news channels talked about the janitor's growing fame. He tried to act like he didn't care, but he did. Every headline reminded him of that night, of how he had laughed. His fiancée had stopped attending his social events. She spent more time volunteering at the community center, helping organize music lessons for the children. The host didn't understand what had changed in her. He tried to talk to her one evening, asking why she cared so much about those lessons. She looked at him and said simply, "Because it feels real. Those children smile not because of money, but because of hope." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. A few days later, the janitor received a letter from the host's fiancé. It was handwritten and gentle. She thanked him for inspiring her to find meaning again. She told him that his music reminded her of her childhood, of the dreams she once had before she got lost in the world of luxury. The janitor smiled softly as he read it. He hadn't realized that his playing could touch people in so many ways. He folded the letter carefully and kept it inside a book on his shelf. As time went on, he began to get invitations to perform in small concerts and local events. He accepted some of them, but he never left his work at the community center. That place had become his heart. The children continued to grow, their fingers learning the language of music. They played small recitals for their families, and every time they did, the janitor stood in the back smiling proudly. He knew that their success meant more than anything fame could offer. One day, while he was teaching, a little girl asked him, "Why do you always smile when we play, even when we make mistakes?" He chuckled softly and said, "Because every mistake means you're still trying. That's what matters. Music isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and her small hands went back to the keys. But while his days were peaceful, the attention from the outside world grew stronger. Offers came from television shows, talent agencies, and sponsors. Some wanted to use his story for publicity. He refused politely, saying, "Music isn't a business for me. It's life," but many couldn't understand that. But those who truly listened to his music understood that his talent came from a place beyond fame. One evening, he received a visit from the same billionaire who had once mocked him. The man arrived quietly without his usual pride. He looked different, tired, maybe even humbled. The janitor was surprised to see him. The billionaire took a deep breath before speaking. "I came to say thank you," he said slowly. "That night I was a fool. I only saw what was on the surface. But your music showed me something deeper." The janitor listened silently. The man continued, "I've been trying to change. I started a program for young artists who can't afford lessons. Maybe it's my way of making things right." The janitor smiled kindly. "That's a good thing," he said softly. "Sometimes we need to lose pride to find purpose." The billionaire nodded, his eyes glistening slightly. "You taught me that," he said. They shook hands, and for the first time there was no distance between them, just understanding. As the man left, the janitor felt a quiet peace inside. He knew that forgiveness and humility could change even the coldest hearts. Weeks turned into months, and the community center grew into something larger than anyone expected. Donations started pouring in. More instruments were bought. Volunteers joined to teach painting, singing, and writing. The janitor became a symbol of how one moment of kindness or courage could inspire an entire community. People from other cities came just to meet him, not as fans, but as people who wanted to learn how to bring hope to their own lives. One rainy afternoon, he sat alone by the piano after class. The sound of raindrops outside mixed with his quiet tune. He closed his eyes and remembered his parents who had once believed in his dream. He wished they could see him now, not for the fame, but for the peace he had finally found. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the billionaire's former fiancée. She stood at the door holding an umbrella. "You play like the rain," she said with a small smile. He smiled back. "Maybe because I've lived through a few storms," he replied. She walked closer and sat down beside him. "You've changed so many lives," she said. "You even changed his," he nodded quietly. Sometimes music can reach where words can't. They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the rain and the fading notes of the piano. There was no need for more words. That night he went home and thought about everything that had happened since that first evening at the mansion. The laughter, the challenge, the music, all of it had led to this moment. He realized that sometimes humiliation can turn into a blessing if you hold on to what's true. He smiled softly, whispering to himself. Life has its own way of making things right. He didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe more concerts, maybe more lessons. But he did know one thing. He would never stop playing. Not for fame, not for approval, but for the simple joy of reminding people that beauty still exists in the world, even in unexpected places. And as he closed his eyes that night, the sound of the piano seemed to follow him, gentle and endless, like a song that never truly ends. The sound of applause still echoed in the grand hall long after the janitor had finished playing. What had started as a joke had turned into a night no one would forget. The billionaire, who had once laughed at the man, now sat silent, unable to hide the shock and shame on his face. But for the janitor, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who he was and what he loved. As the crowd surrounded him, asking questions and wanting to know more, he felt a mix of confusion and relief. For years, he had been invisible in that same room, cleaning floors, picking up glasses, and hearing laughter that never belonged to him. Now, all eyes were on him, and he didn't know what to do next. The billionaire stood up and walked toward him. The laughter that once filled his eyes was gone. Instead, there was something else, curiosity, maybe respect. He reached out his hand and said something no one expected. He offered the janitor a chance to perform again, this time not as a joke, but as part of his charity event that would be held in the coming month. The crowd clapped again, but the janitor only smiled politely. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be part of a show or if he was ready to step into a world that once turned its back on him. He told the billionaire he needed time to think about it. The billionaire nodded, a little surprised, but respected his answer. When the event ended and the guests began leaving, the janitor walked quietly through the empty hall. The same piano sat there, now silent again. He touched the keys gently as if saying goodbye to an old friend. His heart felt heavy and light at the same time. Something inside him had changed forever. On his way out, the event manager stopped him and thanked him for saving the evening. She told him that everyone was talking about him, and the billionaire wanted to know his story. The janitor smiled faintly. He said that maybe one day he would share it. That night, when he got home to his small apartment, he sat by the window watching the city lights. He thought about his old life, his dreams, and how life had taken him away from the piano. He used to play in small bars and community centers when he was younger. He had dreams of becoming a professional musician, but life had other plans. His mother fell sick. Bills piled up, and he took whatever work he could find to keep them both afloat. The piano became a memory. Now, years later, that memory had come back in front of hundreds of people. The next morning, he went back to work as usual. He swept the same floors, emptied the same bins, and greeted the same people who had ignored him a week before. But now things felt different. People smiled at him. Some stopped to talk. A few even asked him to play again. He didn't let it get to his head. He stayed humble. Deep down, he knew fame was not what he wanted. He wanted purpose. But still, something inside him whispered that this might be a second chance. One evening, while he was cleaning near the stage, the billionaire walked in again. He seemed calmer than before. He said he had been thinking a lot about what happened and that he wanted to make things right. He admitted he had been wrong to make fun of him and wanted to support his music, if he was willing to take that step. The janitor hesitated. He didn't want charity or pity. The billionaire assured him it wasn't that. He said he truly believed the world needed to hear someone who played with that much feeling. It wasn't about the money or status. It was about soul. The janitor stayed silent for a while, then said he would think about it. For the next few days, he spent his evenings at an old community hall where he used to play years ago. The piano there was old and slightly out of tune, but it felt like home. He played for himself, sometimes for a few people who came to listen. It reminded him of what he had lost and what he might still find. As he played one night, a young boy came up to him and asked if he could learn. The janitor smiled and said yes. That one small request made something clear to him. Maybe his gift wasn't just for him. Maybe it was meant to be shared. A week later, he went back to the billionaire's office and said he was ready to accept the offer, but on one condition. He wanted the performance to raise funds for children who couldn't afford music lessons or instruments. The billionaire agreed immediately. He even promised to match every donation. The janitor felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was building something. As the event day came closer, he practiced whenever he could. Some nights he stayed late after work, playing in the empty hall. The cleaning crew would watch quietly, moved by the sound. The billionaire visited often, watching him practice from a distance. There was respect now, not just for the music, but for the man who played it. Slowly, word spread and people started talking about the upcoming charity event. Tickets sold out faster than anyone expected. The night of the event finally arrived. The hall glowed under golden lights and the air buzzed with excitement. The billionaire walked on stage and spoke about second chances, humility, and the power of unexpected talent. Then he introduced the janitor, whose story had touched the hearts of everyone present. As the janitor stepped on stage, he could feel hundreds of eyes watching him again. But this time, it didn't scare him. He smiled, sat at the piano, and let his fingers do the talking. The first few notes filled the air, soft and deep. The audience grew quiet. As the music flowed, something magical happened. The melody carried stories of hardship, love, loss, and hope. It wasn't just a performance. It was a confession. People wiped tears from their eyes. Even the billionaire sitting in the front row looked moved. The janitor wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was playing for every person who had ever been overlooked, every dream that had been buried under struggle. When he finished, the silence lasted for a few seconds before the room exploded into applause. The audience stood up, cheering louder than they ever had. Reporters rushed to the stage, photographers clicked endlessly, and people called his name. But he didn't stay long in the spotlight. He stood, bowed once, and quietly left the stage. He wanted the moment to belong to the music, not to him. After the event, donations poured in for the children's music program. The billionaire kept his promise and doubled the amount. The janitor was offered many opportunities, interviews, performances, even contracts. But he didn't rush into anything. He knew fame could fade, but the chance to make a difference was rare. So he focused on the music school project. He spent his days cleaning as usual, and his evenings teaching children who wanted to learn. Months passed, and the project grew. More sponsors joined, more children enrolled, and the old community hall became a place full of music again. The janitor was now known as a man who turned mockery into melody, but he remained humble. When asked how he felt about everything that had happened, he said he was grateful, not for the fame, but for the chance to touch lives through what he loved. One afternoon, the billionaire visited the music school quietly. He watched the children playing simple tunes under the janitor's guidance. He smiled, realizing how much had changed. The janitor had found his true purpose, and the billionaire had learned something valuable, that greatness could be found in the most unexpected places. Before leaving, the billionaire placed a small envelope on the piano. Inside was a note that said, "For every dream you help bring to life." Along with it was a generous donation for the school. When the janitor found the note later, he didn't say a word. He simply smiled, placed the envelope in a drawer, and went back to teaching. The children laughed, played wrong notes, and tried again. It was messy, loud, and imperfect, but beautiful. And as the sound of their laughter mixed with the music, he realized that this was his real stage, not the grand hall, not the spotlight, but here, in this small room filled with hope and sound. That night, as he walked home under the city lights, he thought about how life had come full circle. He had lost everything once, only to find something much deeper. The world might see him as the janitor who amazed a billionaire, but he knew his story was about more than that. It was about rediscovering the song inside you, even when the world goes silent. The next few months passed quietly, but something inside the janitor had changed forever. He no longer saw his life as just a routine of sweeping floors and wiping tables. Every time he heard the sound of the piano, even from far away, it reminded him of that moment when the world finally heard him. The music school was now growing faster than he ever imagined. Children came every day after school, carrying their hopes and their tiny dreams. Some came shy and unsure, others full of energy and excitement. Each one of them reminded him of himself when he was young, filled with dreams and a heart full of sound. He spent his mornings at his janitor job and his evenings teaching music. The balance wasn't easy, but it gave him peace. The billionaire had stayed true to his word and continued supporting the school from the background. But the janitor never asked for anything more than that. He wanted the school to be a place where children could find themselves through music, just like he had once found himself through those same keys. One day, while he was finishing his cleaning shift, a man from a well-known music foundation visited him. He said that their organization had seen the viral video of his performance and wanted to recognize him for his contribution to music education. They invited him to an awards event where artists from around the world would attend. The janitor hesitated. He had never been comfortable with fame or being the center of attention. But when the children from his school heard about it, they begged him to go. They told him he had inspired them, and that he deserved to be honored. Their words touched him deeply, and he finally agreed. As the award night approached, he felt nervous again, just like before the charity concert. He wore a simple suit that the billionaire had quietly arranged for him, though he didn't want to admit it. The hall was grand, filled with famous faces and bright lights. He sat quietly in the back row, not wanting to draw attention. When his name was called, he froze for a second, but the applause pushed him to stand. As he walked to the stage, the memories of the past few years flashed before him. His mother's illness, his long nights at work, the broken piano in the old hall, and that fateful night when everything changed. The host handed him a microphone and asked if he wanted to say a few words. He took a deep breath and looked at the audience. His voice was calm and honest. He said he was not a star, not a professional, but just a man who never forgot how to dream. He told them that music was not about fame or money, but about connection, about speaking when words were not enough. The audience listened quietly. Some even stood up and clapped before he finished. The moment was real and simple, just like him. After the event, several people came to meet him. Some offered him record deals. Others wanted to feature him in documentaries. He listened politely but declined most of them. He said he had already found what he was looking for. What he wanted was to keep teaching, to keep helping others find their voice through music. The billionaire, who was also at the event, watched from a distance with a proud smile. He had learned that not all success is measured by wealth or fame. A few weeks later, a journalist visited the music school to write a story about him. She spent the day watching the children play and talking to them about their teacher. When she asked the janitor what his secret was, he said there was none. He simply believed that everyone has a song inside them, and all they need is someone to listen. That line became the headline of her article, and soon even more people reached out to support the school. With the new funding, the janitor expanded the school. They bought new instruments, hired more teachers, and opened weekend classes for adults who had always wanted to learn music, but never had the chance. The place became a community, filled with laughter, hope, and sound. Every corner of the building carried the warmth of dreams being born again. One afternoon, the billionaire stopped by unannounced. He looked around the school with quiet satisfaction. The sound of children laughing and playing made him smile. He told the janitor that he had been thinking of creating a larger music center, one that could reach even more children in different cities, and he wanted him to lead it. The janitor was surprised. He had never thought of himself as a leader, but the billionaire said he already was one. After all, he had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of hope. The janitor took a deep breath and agreed, but only if the center stayed true to its purpose, to help those who needed it most. Months later, the new center opened with great celebration. It was bigger, brighter, and filled with instruments of every kind. The opening ceremony was simple but emotional. Children from the original school performed a small concert dedicated to their teacher. As the janitor watched them play, his eyes grew wet. He realized how far they had come, not just him, but everyone who believed in what he stood for. After the performance, the billionaire took the stage and spoke about the journey they had shared. He said he had once laughed at a man who worked quietly in the background, not knowing that the same man would change his view of life. The audience applauded as the billionaire turned toward the janitor and said, "Thank you for reminding us that greatness often hides in humility." The janitor stood there, smiling modestly, wishing his mother could have seen that moment. As the years passed, the janitor continued teaching and helping others. He never let fame or attention change him. He lived simply, often spending his evenings by the piano alone, playing tunes that no one else heard. Sometimes the billionaire would visit just to listen. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. The music said everything. One day, as he was closing the school, a young girl stayed behind. She looked nervous but determined. She told him that she wanted to quit learning because she thought she wasn't good enough. The janitor smiled softly and told her a story about a man who once gave up on music because life got too hard, only to find it again when he least expected it. The girl listened, her eyes wide, and when he finished, she said she wanted to try one more time. As she played the piano that evening, her small hands shaky but full of effort, he felt the same warmth that had carried him through all those years. That night, After everyone had gone, he sat at the piano once more. He played quietly, the notes soft and tender. The melody filled the room like a whisper of gratitude. He thought of all the people he had met, the lessons learned and the laughter shared. He realized that every hardship he had faced had led him here, to this peace, this purpose. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. Life continued, noisy and fast, but inside that small music hall, time seemed to pause. The janitor closed his eyes, his hands still resting on the keys, and smiled. He knew now that his journey was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about discovering the beauty of never giving up. His story had started as a moment of humiliation, but it had turned into a melody of redemption, and as the last note faded into the quiet night, he whispered softly to himself, thankful for every twist of fate that brought him back to the piano, because sometimes life takes everything from you, only to return something even more precious, a chance to begin again, with music in your heart and hope in your hands. The years moved quietly, and the world kept changing, but the janitor's story continued to live in the hearts of many. What began as a single performance that silenced laughter had grown into something much bigger. The music center he helped build had become a safe place for children, dreamers, and even adults who had once given up on their passions. The sound of piano keys, violins, and soft laughter filled the air every day. It was a sound that carried warmth and hope. The janitor never thought he would become someone others looked up to. He had never chased fame or applause. All he ever wanted was to share music, the one thing that had always spoken for him when words couldn't. He still woke up early every morning, followed his simple routine, and walked the same path to the center. Some days he would stop by the old hall where it all started, just to sit at the same piano that had changed his life. It was worn out now, but he never wanted it replaced. It reminded him that beauty could come from broken things, too. People sometimes recognized him on the street, asking for pictures or wanting to shake his hand. He always smiled politely and thanked them, but deep down he stayed the same quiet soul he had always been. One afternoon, as he was finishing a class, a letter arrived. It was from a famous music academy overseas. They had heard about his work and wanted to invite him to give a talk to their students. He stared at the letter for a long time, unsure of what to say. He wasn't a trained teacher or a celebrity musician. He was just a man who once cleaned floors. But the billionaire encouraged him to go, saying that his story had more power than any lesson from a textbook. After thinking it over, the janitor agreed. A few weeks later, he found himself on a plane for the first time in his life. Looking out of the window, he felt both nervous and amazed. When he arrived, the academy welcomed him warmly. Students and teachers filled the auditorium. When he walked in, the room fell silent. They had all seen the viral video of him playing years ago, but seeing him in person felt different. He stood at the podium, hands slightly trembling, and began to speak. He told them about his journey, about losing everything, finding hope in music again, and realizing that greatness had nothing to do with where you stood in life, but with how deeply you loved what you did. The students listened closely, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. By the time he finished, the entire hall stood up to applaud him. After the talk, many young musicians came to him with their stories. Some were struggling, others on the verge of giving up. He listened to each of them with patience and kindness, offering simple advice. Never stop believing that your sound matters. Before leaving, he was gifted a small golden key from the academy, a symbol of appreciation for opening hearts through music. He accepted it humbly, saying it belonged to everyone who had ever believed in a second chance. When he returned home, the children at the music center welcomed him with cheers and flowers. They wanted to hear every detail about his trip. He told them not just about the applause, but also about the students who reminded him of them, full of dreams, fears, and endless possibilities. That evening, they played a special concert for him, and he sat quietly, smiling as their small hands created a world of sound. The billionaire was there too, sitting in the corner as he often did, quietly proud. But time has a way of moving faster than we expect. The janitor was getting older now. His hands, though still steady, tired more easily. He spent less time performing and more time teaching. The children noticed, but he always told them he was fine. One day, as he watched a young boy play a difficult piece perfectly, he felt a deep peace wash over him. That was the moment he realized something. The music no longer belonged to him. It had passed on. His dream was alive in others now. A few months later, the billionaire visited him again. They sat together by the piano in the quiet hall. The billionaire confessed that he had been thinking a lot about the night they first met, the night when laughter turned into silence. He said it had changed him forever. He had learned to treat people differently, to look beyond appearances and to listen more. He told the janitor that he owed him more than he could ever repay. The janitor simply smiled and said that what mattered was that he had learned something from it. They shared a long, quiet moment before the billionaire stood to leave. As he walked out, the janitor looked at the piano and softly played a few notes, as if to say goodbye to that chapter of his life. The music center continued to grow, and soon it expanded to new cities. Every branch carried his message, that music could heal, connect, and transform lives. He trained a few of his older students to become teachers, making sure the spirit of the place stayed alive. The young girl who once wanted to quit was now one of the lead instructors. She often told new students the story of the janitor who changed everything with a single song. And every time she told it, her eyes would shine with pride. One winter morning, the janitor arrived at the center early as usual. The sun had barely risen and the streets were quiet. He sat at the piano and began to play softly. It was the same piece he had played years ago, the one that had silenced the crowd and opened a door to a new life. The notes floated through the empty hall, gentle and pure. As he played, memories flooded back. The laughter, the applause, the tears, the faces of the children he had taught, the kindness of strangers, and the journey that had brought him here. When he finished, he closed his eyes for a moment and let the silence wrap around him. That same day, he decided it was time to step back. He handed over the leadership of the center to his students, saying that it was their turn now. They protested at first, begging him to stay, but he smiled and said he would always be there in spirit. He wanted them to keep the music alive in their own way. Before leaving, he gave each of them a simple message: never play just to be heard. Play to make someone feel. The farewell event was small but full of emotion. Former students came from far away to thank him. Some brought flowers, others brought letters. The billionaire gave a short speech, saying that the janitor had not just played music, he had rewritten the meaning of it. The audience applauded, and many wept quietly. The janitor didn't like grand gestures, so he kept his speech short. He said he was proud of everyone, that he had received more love than he could ever give back, and that if anyone ever doubted themselves, they should remember that even a janitor can change the world with a song. After that day, he spent his time quietly, away from the spotlight. Sometimes he walked past the music center just to listen to the sound of the piano from the street. It always made him smile. The children didn't see him often anymore, but his presence was everywhere, in every note they played, every song they sang. The billionaire visited him once in a while, bringing tea and stories about how the center was changing lives all over the country. They would sit for hours talking like old friends, grateful for how far life had brought them. Years later, on the anniversary of the first charity concert, the music center held a grand event in his honor. They named the main hall after him and placed his old piano right in the center of the stage. The same piano that had started it all. The billionaire, now older too, gave a heartfelt speech. He said that a long time ago he had mocked a man who worked quietly in the shadows, and that moment had turned into one of the most important lessons of his life. He ended his speech by saying, "He taught us that true greatness is not in power or wealth, but in humility, kindness, and heart." As the children played his favorite melody, the audience stood in silence, feeling every note. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a continuation of everything he had stood for: perseverance, dignity, and the belief that music could change lives. His legacy lived in every hand that touched a piano key, in every voice that found